Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. Welcome back to another episode of the Idaho Main Street Podcast. We've got a pretty impressive guest here with us today, an emerging leader in the Gem State, the head and leader of Lift Local Idaho, the one and only Kate Simonds. How'd we do? I get all those words right, Kate?
That was perfect.
Look at that. Okay, we're off to
Congratulations. You're the first.
Kate was briefing me beforehand and making sure that I pronounced everything correctly. And now we can have fun because I said everything correct once. So now if I mess it up again, that's okay, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's what post-production's for, right?
Perfect. So, Kate, we're really excited to talk about your organization today, Lift Local Idaho, all the great things you're doing in that space. But first, a little bit about you. Born and raised in Idaho, graduated from Timberline High School in Boise, but then dipped off for a little bit and educated at UC Berkeley. What was that experience like going from education in Idaho to then education at Berkeley, of all places?
You know, it was brutal, and I also think it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It would be hard to imagine a more different culture than going from Idaho to the Bay Area during the I moved in 2015, so it's during the presidential election, during Black Lives Matter, during pretty significant culture shifts in the area and across the country. So I really saw the spectrum of political ideology, and it was like being thrown into a pool with a lot of sharks, I would say, but I learned so much. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about my own beliefs. And I feel really grateful for my time there, and also feel really grateful to be back here because I think it made me a lot better at my job.
Yeah, and I love the analogy of you in the pool with the sharks. I think at times we look in Idaho at the us versus them, and we have to discount everybody that's not us. But there is some significant value, as you mentioned, in being somewhere else, and then particularly coming back home. What was it about Idaho that brought you back?
It's the quality of life. I really think that I measure this all the time. You know, I'm somebody who's really enchanted by, I've done a lot of travel, and I'm somebody who, every time I go to a new city, in the first 5 minutes of being there, I think, wow, should I move? And every time I touch down back home, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to be able to be on my bike in 5 minutes, to be on my skis in half an hour. I love saying hi to everybody on the street. It's just a great place to be. And I just know that anywhere else I might move in my life, it would be an erosion of quality of life. So it's hard to imagine myself leaving.
Yeah, it does take leaving to appreciate home. We had Senator Risch on the podcast, and he talked about wanting to make it a requirement for every college freshman or senior, some in their youth to go live in a different country for a period of time. I think he particularly said a communist country. He said they'll come back and appreciate the country. And while that may be a pretty stark requirement, I think that whenever people travel, they appreciate Idaho a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to leave also to appreciate other places and recognize how we might grow. That's kind of the crux of the work that we're doing is focused on growth. And I've learned a lot about what I think cities and communities could and should look like based on the travel that I've gotten to do. So I'm really grateful for those experiences, and also really grateful for the community that we have here and the diversity of communities that we have across our state.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful preface to the work that Lift Local Idaho is doing. So this is an organization that you lead that meets at this perfect intersection of public policy, of economic development, and of community involvement or community organization. And those three things are all essential parts of enacting institutional change, but also just general improvement of, if you want to get things fixed and better, that's the place to be. And that's where your organization is.
Yeah, that's a beautiful introduction to our organization. I get to tell people all the time that I think I have the best job in the state. A huge part of my job is getting to travel around the state of Idaho. A friend of mine jokes that I'm Idaho's Johnny Cash because I've been literally everywhere. I spend so much of my time on the road visiting various communities I've been to dozens and dozens in the 2 years that I've been doing this. And man, I really love our state, and I love getting to be at the epicenter of that work. And it's such a broad conversation as well, right? Like you mentioned that we work in quality of life, we work in economic development, we work in public policy. And what I've found is these are really emotional conversations because Idahoans are so protective over these communities that we've built, and we're very protective over our quality of life, which I think goes to show why the work is so necessary and so important. And it makes the job, it makes the conversations really, really meaningful because I get to be one of the people, one of the many people across the state doing this work, getting to help them protect that and bolster that. And despite all of the challenges that our communities are facing, you know, relating to growth or not, I get to be one of the people to say, I'm here to help you maintain what you love about your community. And it's just really influential work, really impactful.
Yeah, for our younger listeners, we'd encourage you to go on Spotify and listen to the song "I've Been Everywhere, Man" by Johnny Cash. Uh, they probably missed that reference, but I caught it. Don't worry, Kate. I caught it.
Thank you.
Now then, walk us through a little bit about the mission. So Lift Local Idaho has a fantastic name, right? It envelops the imagery of elevation, of rising up. And then the branding is awesome. The logo, everything's cool. But that's really just a paper tiger of it. There's actually a meaningful and passionate mission. Talk to us about why that exists and why you care so much about it.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for complimenting our branding. I can't take credit for that. That was done by our friends at Drake Cooper here in Boise. And what I love about our logo is we have a mountainscape, like many, nonprofits, like many organizations based in Idaho have in their logos. But what we have is a cornered off triangles making up this mountainscape, which are meant to represent the different regions of our state. And what I love about that is that Idaho is, relatively small. I mean, a big state geographically, but we don't have that many people. And what we know in this work that we've done and in the research that I've done is these regions could not be more different, but together we have this shared state that we're all really proud of. So thank you for complimenting the logo. I think it's a great one. But yeah, our Lift Local Idaho, we were founded officially in 2023, unofficially in 2022 by Casey Lynch, who is the CEO of Roundhouse. And our mission is to give all voters in Idaho the choice and the tools to directly impact and address their unique community needs. And this is, of course, including, but is not limited to the expansion of local option authority, which is kind of our big thing right now. So we're focused on who can utilize local option authority, who might use it in the future, and what that might look like for the state. So I care a lot about this work because as I've said, and as you introduced me, I am a lifelong Idahoan. I love it here. And in my travels with this job, I have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conversations with Idahoans across the state, whether they're, concerned citizens, they're business leaders, they're legislators, their, city administrators, whoever it might be. Everyone really cares about Idaho. Everyone really cares about their community. And they're also very aware of the problems that their communities are facing. Idahoans are in tune with what's happening at home, and they share those stories with me. I carry those stories with me in the work that I do and the advocacy work that I do. And I just I care a lot about this work personally and selfishly. I love it here. I want to protect this state. I want to protect the city that I live in. And I want to make sure that future generations get to enjoy it as much as I did growing up. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing, and really hoping that we can continue with this mission of just letting cities have the ability to invest in themselves the way that they want to.
Yeah, and when you talk about allowing these cities to have the resources and tools they need to put government closer and closest to the people, it feels good, and it mirrors a lot of what we see in campaign season when the flyers show up in our mailbox. And, it seems like
Right.
most, if not all, candidates support local control. and want to return as much power back to their local leaders. So you
Yeah.
referenced, local taxing authority, the ability for taxing policy to be a solution to some of these growth challenges. And for those who aren't familiar with this mechanism or this resource, which is a vital part of what your organization is looking to do, give
Yeah.
us the 101 on it.
Sure. So the tool itself is called a local option tax. The formal name for it is a non-property local option sales tax. So what it looks like in many of the other states in the nation, 37 of them, including 5/6 of Idaho's neighbors, the exception being Oregon, which does not charge any form of sales tax. It's also something that's used internally in Idaho as well in 22 of our communities here. Those are all resort cities with fewer than 10,000 people. It's a local option tax, so you may have heard of it as a penny tax or a tourist tax. Ultimately, what it is a tool where a city can increase sales tax by 0.25% up to 1%. And that additional sales tax is maintained locally to be used on infrastructure and public service projects. So a lot of the time you'll see it for things like street repair, water, police, fire, and so on. But what is unique about a local option tax is that it is extremely transparent. It is designed to be extremely transparent. So it has to be voted on by the voters in a specific region. So in various case studies across the country, you see this happening at the city level, at the county level, whatever. Ultimately, voters have to know what the additional sales tax is. They have to know exactly what the project is or what the projects are, and the predetermined and mandatory sunset period. So voters have all of that information before they are given the option to vote yes or no, and ultimately the buck stops with them. So a city like the city of Twin Falls, for example, they're kind of our quintessential case study for what local option could look like in the state of Idaho, where they have a population of just over 50,000 people. On any given day, an additional 100,000 people come into the city of Twin Falls, which means that public services are diluted for residents of Twin Falls. It also means that property taxpayers in the city of Twin Falls are paying for the infrastructure and public services to be provided for the additional 200% of the population that comes in on any given day. So they need more police, they need more fire, they need more water, they need more broadband, they need more education, all of the things that fall within this basket of infrastructure. And so if the city of Twin Falls wanted to, they could increase sales tax by up to 1%. And that depends on what the city of Twin Falls would want to do. And ultimately, I have been told by their team that could raise up to almost $16 million a year for the city to provide those services. And the city of Twin Falls, if they chose to, because they, of course, are already generating that funding in property tax revenue, they could potentially decrease property taxes for the folks in their area by up to 40%. So it really looks like a diversification of funds for the city. And so Twin Falls is a really great example because they need this funding, right? They want to provide the highest quality of life possible for the folks, the residents in their area who are already paying these property taxes and love the city of Twin Falls that they live in. In their most recent city survey, they actually were able to ask this question to their residents and say, what do you think about two things? One, should we have the option to do this? And two, would you vote yes if we were to put this on the ballot? And what we saw was that 70% of those respondents supported the idea of Twin Falls having the option to ask their voters if they would like to enact the tax. And so we know that is a really popular idea within cities. And we're excited to be able to offer that as an option potentially, and really become the forum for those discussions to happen in all cities across the state, whether they look like Twin Falls, whether they are a university town like Pocatello, like Rexburg, like Moscow, or whether they're a rural area with maybe they've got a pizza parlor and they need to stripe the roads, if they can get a percentage of sales tax earned in their area, that might be the reason why they're able to maintain or improve the quality of life for the people who love and live there.
Yeah. I think that's a great explanation of the tool. As we dig in a little bit more to our libertarian listeners, they love 2/3 of that, right? They love local, they love option, but you lost them at tax. Help us
Yeah,
understand. You referenced a few times the value of being able to reduce taxes elsewhere. You also referenced the tax burden shift. I mean, and I'm
yeah.
binging the Kevin Costner TV show Yellowstone, and so a lot of this is ringing true of this idea of having outsiders come in and maybe take more of the tax burden than the residents. All of this seems very nice, but why is this tax policy at times actually the fiscally conservative option?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. You know, a lot of the time you hear folks, especially I would say in the state of Idaho, saying that we should run government more like a business. And the truth of that, if that were to be the way that things were right now, in places like Twin Falls, in places like I mean, really any city that has any sort of, it's on some sort of transit corridor, maybe there's tourists, whether they are out of state or regional, you have people coming through town. In a place like Twin Falls, for example, where they maybe have 200 to 250% of their population coming into their town on, or the size of their population coming into their town on any given day. If it were a business, it would mean that they're charging only a quarter of the customers that walk through their door. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for us not to be charging and diversifying who is paying for these infrastructure and those public services. So from a business standpoint, that's the wrong thing to do, right? We also know that cities, because are limited, they're limited in what they can do to fund these infrastructure and public service projects, right? They can either increase property taxes. That's the tool that they have, which is limited, right? They can only do that up to a certain percent. They can ask for funding from the state or from the federal government, which is not a popular choice either. Or they can withhold from investing in those investments to begin with. And we know that delaying those maintenance costs can actually make those projects way more expensive down the road. So the number that I often see in my research is up to 600%. Projects can become up to 600% more expensive if we kick the costs down the road and choose to deal with it at a later point. And that's just not something that is the fiscally responsible choice, right? We know that someone is going to have to pay for water services at some point. Someone is going to have to pay for roads, for police, for fire, for a new squad car, whatever it might be. And the right choice, the cheapest choice, the most fiscally responsible choice is to take on those costs as they come up. Not only because that's the best thing to do for our residents and their quality of life, but also because it's the cheapest choice.
And the timing of this matters because we have almost become inoculated to the phrase that Idaho is experiencing unprecedented growth to the point
Yeah.
that we just kind of all accept it. But we almost all need to just take a breath and acknowledge that Idaho's unprecedented growth matters. And at Lift Local Idaho, you all talk a lot about how there's a right way to manage and experience growth, and there's a wrong way to grow. And
Yeah.
we're not counting heads as people come in and say, okay, sorry, we're full for a little bit, come back later. It's coming, and most of these cities and these local communities have to just inherently be reactive to it. And as you reference the idea of deferred maintenance, and it's everything from roads and bridges to police and schools and all of these complicated challenges that come as a result of growth. What is the wrong way to manage growth, and what is the right way to manage growth?
Right. Well, the wrong way to manage growth is to ignore it and hope it doesn't happen. And I think that the truth of the situation, and it's hard for some people to believe, and it's hard for some people to hear, but Idaho is growing because Idaho is great, and we've done a really fantastic job building out a set of values that we all share. We've done a really great job building a quality of life that people are attracted to and people are moving toward. Families want to be here. Young people want to be here. Some retired people want to be here, of course. Businesses want to be here. And if we ignore growth, it means that we are going to have skyrocketing property taxes later on. We're going to have eroding infrastructure. We're going to have worsening traffic. We're going to have overcrowded schools. And we are going to have a quality of life that is increasingly vulnerable. And that is not going to affect whether or not people move here. People are going to move here because it's beautiful, because we're family friendly, because our economy is great. We know those things to be true. And so we know what we need to do is address that growth head on, make sure that we're ready for it, and make sure that we have the systems in place and the tools in place to make sure that we're capable of handling that growth when it comes.
And the local option tax is a key resource to help manage that growth, right?
It's one of the key resources to help manage that growth. Local option is certainly not a silver bullet for the state. Not all of our cities even have a business that charges sales tax. So it's not something that is a prescription. It's not something that is going to fix all of the infrastructure needs that we have. So we know because of the research that we've done, and we actually have a really cool tool on our website that we built out in partnership with the Association of Idaho Cities and a group called Clearwater, where we were able to survey Idaho's 200 cities and get a sense of what their infrastructure needs are. And we turned it into an interactive dashboard. So it lives on our website, and it's really cool because you can filter by type of need, by city, by district, by county, by zip, and really understand what the needs are across the state. And what we found is, first of all, we have an enormous amount of needs at the city level. So with about 75% response rate, we saw about $4.8 billion in unmet infrastructure and public service needs. So that's billion with a B. That is a massive number and is I think, a bit of a jump scare. It feels almost unfathomable how big that number is. But we also know that almost half of that is water related, right? These are drinking water and wastewater needs. And about 95% of water infrastructure is paid for at the local level. So that's scary, right? We know we have a lot of cities across the state have needs that will need to be funded exclusively at the local level. And what we learned is that actually rural cities are disproportionately burdened with the task of taking that on. Because if you have a town of 200 people, your water project might be $23 million. It might be $30 million. And if you have a larger population, you're able to distribute that amongst the population, right? Who pays for it. But if you have a couple hundred people, there's no way that a small town like Gooding, for example, which is facing they need a new water infrastructure system. They have a $23 million project. The only way that they are able to do that is by potentially tripling the water bill for the residents who live there. So we know that local option is a great option to be looking at for cities like Gooding, cities like Boise, cities like Moscow, Rexburg, Ammon, Coeur d'Alene, a lot of these, Pocatello even, a lot of these communities that have a tourist population flowing through, whether they're there, to go to, they're on their way into Utah, they're going to Pocatello for a soccer game, they're going up to Moscow for homecoming weekend, or maybe they're doing what I did last weekend. They're driving up Highway 95 and they stop into a gas station to get a snack and fill up the tank on the way up to a work trip, right? There are people having all kinds of movement across the state. And if cities are able to capitalize on that, as they should be, right? Then it will allow them to help fund those infrastructure needs. So it really is a conversation of it's not a conversation of should all cities have a local option tax. It's could they and do they have the right to? And that is the conversation that Lift Local Idaho is really excited to facilitate.
So there are people listening right now who are hearing this and say, yeah, makes sense. It gives transparency. It gives local power to local voters to decide whether or not that's a mechanism that they want to use for funding. And then the question is, with the percentage of approval that you've talked about and just the common sense layout of such a fiscal policy, Why has there not been more movement on this front?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was up in Moscow last week having a conversation with a bunch of businesses on this exact topic, and there was a woman in the audience that said, I didn't really know what I was getting into today, but I actually saw a presentation similar to this in the '80s, and it was, it's funny, right? It's clear that there have been a lot of people who have been shepherding this conversation for a long time, and Lift Local Idaho is certainly not the first group to be taking this on. And I'm in a position where I get to look at all of the efforts that have preceded me, and I get to assess what worked, what didn't work, what can we do differently. And that's why we're taking such a unique approach. We're a business-led coalition, first and foremost. We're a nonprofit, and I would say, arguably, most importantly, we're statewide, and so we know that there are a lot of people that have been left out of the conversation. There are a lot of needs that did not exist previously that are now at a tipping point. And there are just a lot of people who have moved to the state since these conversations have previously happened that deserve to have a voice in this conversation. So previous efforts have failed, of course, which is why we're taking on this work now. And I would say the answer to that question is because, um, despite unilateral, or I guess universal, excuse me, despite this sort of ubiquitous support from cities, from chambers, from advocacy groups, from economic development groups, from citizens, from people who are adjacent to politics or adjacent to business, folks who understand that our quality of life is at risk and our infrastructure needs are reaching their tipping points. These are things that have been true for a very long time. Yes, the severity of those needs has become more significant. Yes, the salience of the topic has increased, but ultimately, the reason why this has not been successful legislatively is because the legislature has not wanted us to be successful. We know that there are legislators who believe and have believed for a long time that this is a decision that should not rest within cities. So it's a really paternalistic relationship, I would say, between the legislature and cities. And cities are asking for more. Cities have always been asking for more, and this is why the conversation has been going on for decades and decades at this point. To which I respond with, when are we going to stop wasting time talking about this? If this is what cities are so desperate for, if Idaho is really that much of a home rule state, then the legislature should take property tax relief seriously and infrastructure funding seriously, and let cities have what they're asking for and have been asking for decades. This is within their power to address those things with one swipe. And they haven't done so. So we know that there are a lot of legislators who are really eager to work on this. We recently finished our candidate survey for the general election coming up. I have heard from a lot of legislators that they're really excited to work with us on this, and that there are a lot of legislators who care a lot about the communities that they represent. And so there's movement. We know that progress is incremental in this space, and it's really about moving the needle, which is why we have set ourselves up to build a long on-ramp. So we're not introducing legislation in 2025. We might not introduce legislation in 2026. We have a lot of relationships to build, and frankly, a lot of education work to do. We know that the word tax is scary to folks, and no one wants to be charged more. And we know that everyone is hurting right now. And our primary focus is really not to do any harm. So we have a lot of work to do the research we need to do to make sure we're building a tool that will effectively work for communities across the state, and a lot of education work to do and relationship building with legislators to get them to understand that, yeah, this is something that has focused on Boise in the past. It's something that has this tool, the conversation around local option, has focused on things like transportation in the past. And we're really hoping to be shepherds of a much broader conversation to discuss all infrastructure, whether that's transportation, whether that's water, whether that's public safety, whether that's education, and include all regions of the state. to make sure that this is something that ultimately, will impact Idahoans the way that we want it to.
So if I'm a legislator who doesn't support, this mechanism or cities having the autonomy to kind of make these decisions, briefly explain to us what my thought process is in opposition to this.
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is that it's fine if people don't want to have a local option in their city. That is okay. It's not my job to tell a city what to do with their economy, with their money, with their finances. That's not up to me, nor should it be, right? I'm not the arbiter of this policy, but I do believe that every city should have the same toolbox, regardless of what their economy looks like, regardless of who's in their city, who's coming into their city, who's leaving their city, how many people live there, what their industry is. We think that all cities should have, all communities really should have the same access to tools. And that seems to me to be a pretty Idahoan value. So I would first and foremost say to those legislators, do you agree with that? Right? Should every city have equal access to these tools? And ultimately, whether a city chooses to use this or not is up to them. And I'm excited to be setting up a long paper trail of research for them to be successful with those campaigns, should they choose to endure them later on. But right now, again, the conversation should focus on, should cities have the right? Should communities have the right? Should counties have the right to even ask their residents this question? So the crux of this isn't necessarily, okay, do you agree or disagree that your city should have this tool? The answer is that not every city, it doesn't make sense economically for every city to be able to utilize this. And what is so great about the tool itself is, and the way that it works now and what we're hoping to expand, is that it is extremely malleable. So you look at an area like Valley County, you have McCall, you have Cascade, you have Donley. All of these communities have the ability to utilize local option. All of them apply it differently and use the funds differently based on what their community needs and where they're getting their financing, where those tourists are coming from. And so that's really what we're hoping to expand, is let cities do what they do best, which is know themselves, right? So that is the first thing that I would want to say to a legislator in opposition is, okay, great. If this is something that you're personally opposed to, that's fine. Maybe your city is opposed to it as well. Maybe your population is opposed to it. In addition, that's fine. But shouldn't we all have equal access to the tool? And I believe that most legislators would say yes.
No legislation coming, so all of our legislative listeners can take a deep breath knowing that you're not going to come knock down their door with a piece of legislation. But to the listeners who, the listeners who are suddenly born again now when it comes to local option tax and just these general conversations surrounding growth and empowerment of cities, what can we do? How do we get involved? Is there a spot for us in the coalition?
First of all, I love the phrase born again local option supporters. That's hilarious. I'm hoping to convert all of you. Yeah, there's a few ways that you can get involved. The first thing is just having a conversation with me. As I've said, I spend a lot of time on the road, getting to travel the state, and I would love to come speak to you, to whoever's listening. Reach out to me and let's have a conversation about what your community needs are, and if local option might be a good tool for your community. So I often speak in various settings. I'll speak with chambers. I'll do presentations, even down to things like Lions groups or Lions clubs. I'm all over the place and would love to come to your community. It's my favorite part of my job. So reach out to me, join the coalition if you'd like to. There's a few tiers of ways that you can be involved, whether you're a supporter, an advocate, or a champion. And ultimately that just looks like joining the conversation and doing what we can to educate folks on what this might look like in the years to come.
And to learn more, your website is?
liftlocalidaho.org.
liftlocalidaho.org. And the best part of Kate coming to visit is not only is she going to speak, but she's going to bring her dog, Olive. And Olive is a Spanish Spaniel. She's adorable. We were bonding earlier on our love for springers. Now, Kate, since this is your first time on the podcast, there's a few things we have to do to initiate you. Number one is we got to commit you to coming back. And next time we got to get you in studio because you've been everywhere. So you're going to have to come here in studio and have an interview. So that's step number one.
Perfect. Do I get a walk-up song?
It's going to be Johnny Cash. So you got it. But we expect you in black next time, all in black.
Okay.
That's a Johnny Cash reference for our younger listeners. That was not me telling anybody what they should and shouldn't wear. Okay, number two. You've been everywhere. So we have to know, as you've been traveling through Idaho, what is one little hole-in-the-wall restaurant that you've been to that you would recommend if somebody is traveling through that town, they need to try that place?
This feels proprietary.
You can add a disclaimer.
I do. I have a list on my phone of spots that I've found, whether I love hot springs. I'll visit different hot springs or different trails. I love to put the skis in the car or the bike on the car and get to explore our state as I take on these work trips. Let's see.
Well, I think it was in the vice presidential debate. One of the candidates looked at the other and said, that is a damning non-answer. And that's what I'm going to throw at you, Kate, is that was a damning non-answer.
I don't want to give away my spots.
That's all right. Well, how about you? What's worse, giving us your favorite hot springs locations or your favorite restaurant locations?
I don't know the answer to that. Okay, there's a really, really great hot springs between I don't know if I can give this to you, Brendan.
All right. Well, we're gonna work on some trust. Okay. Let's build some trust here.
Some trust. Let's say. You know what? This is not a unique answer, but I love to get a hot fudge milkshake at my father's place after skiing at Brundage, or after any sort of activity near McCall. So we'll use that answer.
We're going to take that. Now, the second question gets harder. So if you struggled with that one, we're in big trouble. Kate, book recommendation. One book that you would recommend our hundreds of millions of listeners right now. It's going to sell it. Yep, we got a lot of people listening. What is the one book you would recommend that everybody needs to go out and read because it will change their life?
Does it need to be Idaho related? I mean,
it does not need to be Idaho related.
I read a lot of books on tax policy these days.
That Director Adams, when we had him on, he told us about reading about regulations to his daughter to put her to sleep at night. So if it's something as dry as that, we'll take it, but we will also judge you in the process.
No. I've got interesting. Let me think. You know, you know what I'm gonna do is I'm going to highlight a local author. I really, really loved Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, who identified a fake mountain town in Idaho, and a lot of this book takes place in it. And it's about, protecting the natural environment. It's about doing what we can to create and protect a sense of home. And I just really loved it. So I'm going to say Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr.
Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we haven't had that one come up yet.
Very much about supporting our public libraries, which is something that I'm really passionate about. So shout out Tony Doerr and our public libraries and our public spaces.
I love it. Kate, you have been so generous with your secrets today, as well as your time. We appreciate your inaugural session on the Main Street Podcast. We've got you committed to coming back and coming in studios. We love what you've taught us today about the power of local control and the ability and tools that can be at people's disposal. This is the first of many conversations. As you go out and build relationships, we hope that we too can be at the table and help you in your endeavors. But until then, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you and the adorable little puppy next time.
You got it. See you in Idaho Falls.
Thanks, Kate.